Welcome to Singing Señorita. So today what I want to share with you is how I taught the imperfect in combination with vocabulary that students would use to talk about themselves. So if that sounds good to you, then stick around. Okay, the very first couple of days of this lesson or these lesson plan weeks that I did, it actually was the tail end of my last chapter. I was giving out speaking tests. So students come to me one-on-one and all of the other students are working on something different. So what I had my students doing was prepping with the vocabulary. So I used Quizlet. So I had students go on the Quizlet set, Cuando era niño, and they wrote down the vocabulary list and they did 3 Quizlet activities. I have a paid subscription, which means I can see which activities each student does. And then on day 2, what I did is I gave them one of my label page activities. So I have label and activity packs where there's just a ton of different activities for students to do. But one of them is a label page. So I gave them the label page, and then their job, once they got the words labeled, was to create a bingo sheet, because we would play bingo once all the speaking tests were done. So what they would do is draw a picture and label. So because I had given them the label page, I said, hey, if you can't draw, trace. So that was how they got familiar with the vocabulary, and after we played bingo, I felt like they knew it well enough. So I moved on to teaching the imperfect. So with the imperfect, what I did is I used a PowerPoint and then students took notes. So I love to have these guided notes because it lets students know what the best information is to write down. So instead of just trying to write down everything, or in some students' case, write down 2 words, then they're just writing down the most important information, and they tend to keep up better and they tend to retain the information better. At least this is what I have found in my classes. So we did the PowerPoint, we did the notes, which include practice activities. So it's more like guided practice / notes. And then I let them work on a Google Forms worksheet, which I allow my students to do over and over again until they make the grade they want, which they get a ton of practice that way, which helps me feel like they're getting the practice they need, and I can see when they've mastered it. So once they had done that lesson, I moved on to combining the vocabulary that we did through the first 2 days, and then we did the imperfect. Now I'm going to combine them in this next lesson, and this is one of my favorite parts. So for this section of my entire lesson set, what I did is I created a PowerPoint to get kids to talk about their childhood. So this is an activity that I do in groups, and it's what I call my stickers activity. So when students come in their room, I have about 8 groups of 4, depending on the size of my classroom. This time 8 worked very, very well. So because of the activities that we were doing, I had my class divided in 2. So 4 on one side and 4 on the other. When students came in, they came in and they grabbed a number that would be their group, and then I had another box with these adorable little Amazon stickers. So as you can see, they've got some super cute ones in here. So they got to pick whichever sticker that they wanted. Some students were really excited about the sticker. Some kids just grabbed whatever's on top. And then once we started the lesson, I actually started in English. So what I did, each one of the groups has one of these cards that has a 1, 2, 3, 4. That way we know who's beginning each activity. I make sure that all the ones are facing at the same corner desk. That way I know who number 1 is. I can see who's talking, and I know who's starting. I know which direction they're going. This just helps me a ton. So what I did is started in English. So I would say something like, when I was young, I used to eat SpaghettiOs and potted meat every day after school. Well, I know that's gross if you know what potted meat is. Does anybody really know what potted meat is? I don't think so. But anyway, so I would do that, and I would say, okay, person number 1, you're going to start your conversation. They would do the same thing. When I was young, I would eat blah, blah, blah. And then person 2 would go. And as they're talking, they're putting down their stickers. And this is one of the reasons why I love the sticker activity, because I can clearly see when all 4 people have had their turn. What this does, 1, it gets all students talking. And 2, instead of me having to listen in to see if they're done, I can visually see when that group has completed the activity. And then I tell them it's okay to chat about whatever once you have done what I've asked you to do. Because most of my students, they're going to just chat a little bit about different things, but quietly. My kids usually don't get too loud. But what I found on this activity is they actually chatted more about their childhood. So they gave each other a turn, and then some of them will go into depth telling stories about their childhood, which is really, oh, I love to see it because they're getting to know their classmates. So after we did a few of those questions in English just to get them warmed up and know how to do the activity, we moved on to activity number 2. So activity number 2, what I did is I taped a piece of yarn down the middle of my classroom. I divided the desk enough to where all the students could line up on that line facing the board. On the board, what I would have is a picture of one of their vocabulary words, and I would ask a question, such as, ¿Jugabas con muñecas? So, did you used to play with dolls? And there would be a sí or a no side, so students would quickly move to which side that pertained to them. And then I would ask the next question, ¿Tenías una tortuga? And they would move to whichever side. So it was a fun activity for them to get to know each other. And I also participate. I stand on one side or the other so that they get to know me a little bit better. So once it was done, it was funny. In one of my classes, they were like, really, that was it? So, because I only had like 10 questions like that. Then I had students move back to the desk, and now that they've gotten practice, they've gotten to hear questions in Spanish. Now they're actually going to start answering the questions in Spanish. So we go back to using the number card and the stickers, but now I'm actually asking them questions in Spanish, and each one of them is answering. So first I answer as an example. So I would ask something like, ¿Tenías un triciclo? And I would say, let's start with person number 2. So person number 2, sí or no, and I tell them they have to answer in a full sentence. So person 2, 3, 4, 1. Once that's done, I move on to the next question, and we went all the way through those questions. And then we actually have another part, a part 4 of this activity, which this is an entire class period activity. So this was one of my fun ones, is I would put a picture on the board of one of their vocabulary words, and I said, all right, as a group, make up a question. So they would come up with a question as their group, and then I would told them I'm going to choose a 1 through 4. And so I would choose, let's say I got number 3. So all the 3s would brace themselves, and then I would pick out a group number. Let's say I picked group number 1, because I have the box of numbers. I just drew it out, so it was random. So person number 3 in group 1 would have to choose anybody in the room. They would have to ask the question that they made up to whoever their person was. So that was a fun way to keep them all alert. It would help them because as a group, they would come up with the question, and they were more likely to get the grammar right because they're discussing it, and they really did talk about it because they didn't know which person I was going to choose to ask the question. It also keeps them on their toes because they're choosing each other, which they always love to get to choose. Sometimes I call it the victim or choose your volunteer is how I start. Some classes I accidentally say victim, and you know, it kind of is. But at the very end of that lesson, we've had a lot of practice with asking and answering questions and talking about childhood. I had students do a ticket out the door. So on that ticket out the door, I had them write 2 sentences about their childhood and 1 question that they would like me to add to the lineup activity. So that was the end of the class. They handed me those things as they left. I read through them. I was going to do another lineup because they liked it so much, but I didn't find that their questions were very different than the ones that we went over the day before. I thought they would be a little bit more creative, but they weren't. So I changed the lesson. So the next day they had a warm up, and then what I did was I wrote sentences combining all of the common errors that I saw when I was reading through their tickets out the door, just the little mistakes that were the most common, but I didn't write any one student's because I didn't want to call anybody out. But I combined all of the errors and made sentences, and we kind of played a little game of, can you find the error in this sentence? And it took some classes a whole lot longer than others to find what was wrong because they were common errors that a lot of students were doing. But then after we went through that, they had a better grasp of how to form questions and answers. So I went on in that class period and gave them the question, ¿Cómo eras de niño? And then what I wanted students to do, I gave them a heads up, you're going to be writing me 5 sentences about this. But first, let's go through the lesson. So I started the lesson, and we actually played a booklet to review old adjectives so that they could first start out with just saying yo era and some descriptive words. So they played the booklet, refreshed on those old Spanish 1 adjective words, and then I was saying, all right, now write 2 or 3 sentences about what you were like as a child using adjectives. So they wrote those, and then I moved on. I was like, now I want you to tell me from yesterday's activities some of the things that you used to do as a child. Now again, let's not be vague about this. I want to know what's specific about you, what's unique about you that you used to do as a child. And so what I did is we went through some of the vocabulary activities and we played around with them. I gave them examples. I wrote 5 sentences of my own, so they still are getting to know me, but they're also seeing sentence structure. So after I wrote my 5, I had them write their own 5 vocabulary words. Now, this took us all period long. I thought I was going to get to do the next activity at the end of the class period, but I did not. So this again, they're 5 sentences. They wrote their name on it, and then I used it as the ticket out the door. So the next day coming back after the warm-up, what I'm doing is I'm reading the sentences that they wrote. I'm going to have all of my students number their pages from 1 to 5. And they have to guess. I'm going to read the sentences of the students without telling them who they are. They have to guess who those students are. So it's just a fun activity to get to know you because they talked a lot in their groups. We're going to see how much they paid attention. So I've done that in several different lessons that I've done. Had them talk about certain things, what their favorite things, in this case, just what they were like as a kid. And students really do like to see if they can figure out who it is. So after that, we're going to do a speaking activity. So I actually made a speaking activity. Now, I sometimes just use my label and activity pages for the speaking activities because I have pages where the words are labeled. And sometimes I have students make up questions, but in this case, I didn't. In this case, I actually made a set with the questions. They alternate between de niño and a question or de pequeño and a question. And what students will do with these is I'll give each student one of the cards when they walk in the door, and then they'll just have a speaking activity where they go up to somebody, they ask the question, they answer and ask, and then they'll trade the cards and then move on to somebody else. So they get lots of practice with all the different types. Now, typically I would do a speaking quiz after this, but because I just did a speaking quiz in the last chapter, this one is going to be a written quiz. And also in these label and activity packs, I'm trying to find one of the games that we usually do. I like to mix up my games and mix up the activities I do, but if you've never played Mata Moscas, what I do is I project this page on the board, which has all of the same drawings they've been working with on the label page and then in the speaking activities. I project this up on the board, and then all I do is I'll call a word in Spanish, and each student will be on either side of the board with a fly swatter, and they just slap it. Whoever slaps the correct word gets a point for their team. It's a fun game. I also have the Spanish words, so if you want to do it from English to Spanish, or if you want to do both, sometimes I'll go through it twice before a quiz. And that's a super fun game. I actually learned about it when I was in college. I loved it. So those are the ways, and that pretty much that's how I would end that lesson when going through the vocabulary. They've been through the imperfect, and then I typically will give a vocabulary quiz. Now, my chapter is not over because I still have indirect object pronouns to teach them before we get to the chapter test. So when I do the chapter test, it will combine the vocabulary about when they were younger, imperfect, indirect object pronouns, all in one. But this is their preparation for the quiz that they're going to be taking over when they were younger. So I hope these ideas have helped you. I will have all of the things that I've used in these different lessons in a link in the description, and I hope that you have an amazing week. Adios.